What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be re-exploring the two-handed Stamsork here. So with the changes to the dual-wield enchant strength, so basically for those of you guys who have not been aware, enchant strength on one-handed weapons has been cut in half as of Wrathstone. Because of this nerf, two-handed Stamsorks have kind of gotten an indirect buff just because dual-wield Stamsorks, as a result of this nerf, obviously had their DPS nerfed a little bit here. So two-handed Stamsorks have always been pretty popular overall. They do have some pretty decent cleave. The two-handed line typically has better cleave than the dual-wield line, and when you combine that with the Stamsork's naturally higher cleave damage potential, you come out with a very strong build that's really well suited to just clearing out trash very quickly. So despite the fact that dual wield has been nerfed a little bit, two-handed builds are still not really going to be seen all too often in the very high-end raiding environment. That being said, you're still capable of creating a two-handed build that's easily capable of keeping up with other stamina builds out there, including dual-wield stam DPS, as long as you are able to really sort of get your rotation down and things like that. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. I will be going over a couple of gear substitutions for those of you guys who do not have access to certain expansions or DLC sets. So you'll be able to basically sort of replace the sets that I'm using right here. And then I will be going over our rotation a little bit, kind of explain why I'm using certain abilities, and then I will go over a 6 million dummy par so you guys get an idea of the amount of DPS that you're able to pull on a stamina sorcerer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started first, as usual, with gear. So this is going to be the best setup if you want to pull the most amount of DPS. So for Monster Helm, we're going with Velidreth. Velidreth is still going to be the strongest Monster Helm set right now for stamina DPS, particularly if you can be within melee range. If the boss's hitbox is large enough, then you can get more than one disease spore to actually hit the boss, resulting in even more DPS. So Velidreth is definitely going to be the set that you want to hold on to if you are going to be a stamina DPS. Now, that being said, Velidreth does require you to have access to the Shadows of the Hiss DLC because it does come from Cradle of Shadows, the dungeon. So if you do not have access to that DLC, you can run a different Monster Helm set. You can run Stormfist or Selene's instead. So Selene's comes from Selene's Web. This is a base game set. Very similar overall DPS compared to Velidreth if you only have one disease spore proccing via Velidreth. But again, Velidreth is going to be a little bit stronger because of that one piece is just weapon damage, so it gives you a little bit more weapon damage that way, plus if the boss is big enough you can get multiple disease spores proccing. So Selene's is a very good holdover for those of you guys who are still trying to farm Velidreth. The other set that you might want to consider running is going to be, I don't have it out here, it's going to be Stormfist. So this is another base game set. You can get this from Tempest Island. This has very good synergy, so to speak. It used to have very good synergy, I should say, with Stamsorks. In the past, Stamsorks did get some additional bonus damage to shock and physical damage. That has been changed now. Stormfist right now is going to be a little bit weaker, but it does give you more cleave damage compared to Selene's because it can hit multiple enemies within that 4-meter radius here. It also does have a chance of proccing minor vulnerability, which does increase group DPS a little bit here with those shock damage hits. Plus you get some additional sustain through the stamina regen one-piece bonus there. But Stormfist is going to be the weakest out of those three Monster Helm options. Moving on to our body set, so we're still sticking with Relequen. Relequen is still going to be the strongest set for you guys to wear as stamina DPS. This does come from the Cloud Rest trial, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to use this set here. Now, I have the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version if you do not have the team necessary to clear Vet Cloud Rest +1 or above. Difference between the perfect and imperfect version is going to be the lack of that max stamina bonus on that 5-piece on the imperfect version. Otherwise, the DPS difference, all the other sort of set bonuses are exactly the same, so you shouldn't see that big of a DPS drop if you are using the imperfect version of Relequen. So this is a body set because you do want to make sure you never drop those Relequen stacks. If once you drop all those stacks, you do have to build them back up, which makes it a little bit difficult. It is going to be a DPS drop. But for those of you guys who do not have access to Somerset, you do have a couple of other gear options that you can choose from that you can either buy off of guild traders or farm them yourself. So starting off, we're going to go in alphabetical order here. And again, I have a lot of sets here, so bear with me while I search for all these sets. So the first set that we're going to go over is going to be Briarheart. So this is a medium armor set that you can get from Hrothgar. This is an overland set though, so you can buy this off of Guild Traders if you do not have access to the Hrothgar zone through the Arsenium DLC. This basically, when you deal critical damage, you get a nice boost to your weapon damage, and because it is a proc, it does carry over to your back bar, so you can also run this as a front bar set as well. And while it's active, you also get a nice heal whenever you deal a critical hit. So this is a pretty nice set overall. It's a very balanced between good amount of damage as well as survivability. This is also a pretty easy set to obtain because you can just buy it off of Guild Traders. Arsenium has been out for quite a while now, so there are definitely pieces out there for you to farm. And again, because it is a proc set, you can also run this on your weapon as a front bar set instead of as a body set, but it doesn't really matter which slot you put them in. Other sets, again, bear with me while I go through all of these sets to find them all. Going to be Leviathan, so this is a base game set. You get this from Crypt of Hearts, and this will be placed on the body here. So this is basically the stamina version of Mother's Sorrow. So as you can see here, it just gives you a whole crap ton of weapon crit. Now that the Shadow Bonus has been buffed, weapon crit and spell crit for stamina and magic DPS respectively have gotten a very nice boost. So it is actually very beneficial to get some more weapon crit if you can. Because the 5-piece is going to be a static bonus, you do want to have this on the body whenever you can. That way you're not losing that weapon crit while you're on your back bar there. So this does come from Crypt of Hearts. You do need to farm this. You can't buy this off of Guild Traders, but Crypt of Hearts 1 is a very easy dungeon to complete. So if you're just going for armor, then you can just clear it on normal very, very quickly, very, very easily. So that way you can just farm your body pieces that way. Some other sets here. Again, bear with me. I'm trying to find them all. Where are the other sets here? A lot of other sets here that I have to kind of go over. Here we go. Strength of Automaton is another set that you might want to consider running. So this is another dungeon set very similar to Leviathan that you can get from Darkshade Cavern. So again, a base game set. So the 5-piece just adds 400 weapon damage to your physical damage abilities. So this is a pretty strong set overall because that weapon damage bonus to your physical damage abilities is actually very nice on a stamp sword because a lot of our damage is actually physical damage. Hurricane is physical damage. Pretty much all of our front bar damage, Carve and Executioner, they're all physical damage. Obviously, your light and heavy attacks are going to be physical damage. The only damage it does not affect is going to obviously be any sort of proc sets because proc sets do not scale off of weapon damage, as well as poison injection. So poison injection is not scaled off of Automaton, but everything else is. So this actually is a very nice set to pick up here. Again, you have to farm this because it is a dungeon set, but Darkshade Caverns 1 is a very, very easy dungeon to kind of farm through if you just want the armor pieces. Very similar to Leviathan, because it is a flat static bonus, you do want to have this on the 5-piece body rather than on your front bar set. Then finally, we do have Sogvin's Warband really quickly. So this is a nice alternative to Advancing Yokeda if you do not have access to the Somerset expansion, because in order to use Advancing Yokeda, you also need to have the Somerset expansion in order to transmute the jewelry. So Sogvin's is a medium armor set that you can get from the Frostvault DLC, Frostvault dungeon, so you do need to have access to the Rastone DLC in order to use this. Again, this is basically a slightly weaker version of Advancing Yokeda. So whenever you deal critical damage, you basically gain a stack of weapon crits for a max of 1,290 additional weapon crit, which ends up being just over 6% or so, I believe. And then you also gain Minor Force when you have all 10 stacks, which increases your crit damage done by 10%. This basically allows you to remove Rearming Trap from your rotation, basically giving you one additional global cooldown return back, so you can use this on something like Executioner. You can use Carve again. Typically speaking, this will just allow you to use one extra Executioner whenever you're on your front bar. So that does save you a little bit of damage that way. It also has a physical penetration bonus as the 4-piece armor bonus, so that allows you to shift some points out of piercing and put them into other CP nodes. So that is also an added benefit of running Sogvin's Warband. So again, this is another dungeon set. You do need to have access to Rastone if you want to farm this set. Now there are a few crafted sets that you can also run as well. So if we go over to the set bonuses here, first set we're going to be talking about is going to be Mechanical Acuity. So this is a crafted set from Clockwork City. So you do need to have access to Clockwork City DLC if you do want to create this yourself. Otherwise, you can typically find somebody who will be able to craft this for you, or you can buy this off of Guild Traders. This basically, the 5-piece, basically gives you a chance to have 100% crit chance for 5 seconds every 18 seconds whenever you deal direct damage. So really, really strong when paired with the Shadow Mundus, and particularly because two-handed builds do have lower crit chance compared to dual-wield build because we don't have an equivalent two-handed dagger. This mechanical acuity is going to be a little bit stronger in two-handed builds compared to dual-wield builds. Another set that you might want to consider running is going to be Hunding's Rage. This is a base game crafted set, so very easy to get. So you do need to know 6 traits in whatever you want to craft though. So again, if you can't craft this yourself, then you can usually find somebody to craft this for you for a small fee, or you can buy this off of guild traders. So this just adds a crap ton of weapon damage, 299 weapon damage. So very similar to Leviathan and Automaton. Make sure this is going to be on your body if you're going to be running Hunding's Rage. Those are a couple of sets that you can run here, and then on our front bar here we are running Advanced Yokeda. This is a heavy armor set that comes from Hellrot Citadel, so this is a base game set, but because it is heavy armor, the jewelry does come in healthy, so you will need to have the Somerset expansion in order to transmute your jewelry to a more appropriate jewelry trait. So you can see here that I have Bloodthirsty. You can also go with Infused or Robust, but you will need to have access to Somerset if you do want to transmute these jewelry pieces that way. And for our front bar, we have a Greatsword of Yokeda, sharpened with a poison damage enchant. And on the back bar, we have a Maelstrom Bow infused with a weapon damage enchant instead. So you can go with Infused with a poison damage enchant set if you'd like. You can also go with a Battle Axe of Advanced Yokeda for the additional bleed damage. But I have had higher DPS when I control a little bit for the Axe bleed RNG. The Greatsword is going to give you the higher DPS, more consistent DPS than the Battle Axe will. We are going Sharpened because we do want to make up for the lack of penetration because we are running the Shadow Mundus. For jewelry, all weapon damage enchants and 3 Bloodthirsty. Bloodthirsty is going to be stronger on a two-handed build compared to a dual-wield build because we do have an execute ability through Poison Injection and Executioner, so Bloodthirsty does give us a much larger boost compared to on a dual-wield build. You can also go with Infused if you would like. Infused is also a very fine trait. It just gives you a stronger weapon damage enchant, and because stamina DPS have much more weapon damage modifiers than they do max stamina modifiers, Infused is going to be much stronger than Robust will be. Then for armor, we are going all divines with all max stamina enchants, and we are going with 7 medium in order to make the most use out of our medium armor passives. Right, so that's pretty much it for gear. Going over to our character sheet, I am an Orc. Orcs are going to give you the highest amount of DPS overall just because they have 2,000 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. You also get a little bit of additional survivability through 1,000 additional max health through their racial passive, so they do have some survivability here. Other racial options you might want to consider running. So the next best option is going to be the Dark Elves. They get 1875 stamina and magicka and 258 max magicka, 258 spell damage and weapon damage. So if you want to play a magicka sorcerer, then Dark Elves are going to be a very good option for you. It's a very, very small DPS loss compared to Orcs or High Elves, so Dark Elves fit very, very nicely into that sort of hybrid race. The Khajiits are another sort of hybrid race that you could select as a Sorc. They get 825 additional magicka health stamina, they get 85 magicka and stamina regen, and they get 100 health regen. So they get fewer max resources, they get a little bit more sustained that way, and they also get 10% additional crit damage done and 10% additional critical healing done, so that does boost their overall DPS as well, again making them a very nice hybrid sort of race here, with a little bit more sustain than the Dark Elves at the expense of a little bit of damage. Then the final 2 races you might want to consider running are going to be the Red Guards and the Wood Elves, the Bosmer. They both get 2,000 max stamina. Red Guards get, I believe, 950 stamina back whenever they deal direct damage, versus the Wood Elves, which get a flat 258 stamina regen, which is affected by all your regen modifiers there. So those 2 races obviously do not have any sort of additional damage bonuses outside of the 2,000 max stamina, but they do get in return a lot of sustain as a result. So in terms of sustain, Red Guards and Bosmer do win out compared to the other 3 races, but they do end up doing less DPS because they don't have any sort of passives which increase their overall damage done. For attributes, we're going all points into stamina here. You can put a few points into health if you would like to sort of pad up your health to give you a little bit more survivability, but I found that 64 stamina is perfectly fine, especially on the stam sword, because you do have a lot of additional resistances through the use of Hurricane. You don't really need to put any additional points into health. If you do, I would not put more than 10 points into health or so. So I am a werewolf. That's just because I like to test werewolves out on my Sorc. So if you want to be a werewolf, you certainly can. The better option is going to be a vampire if you want to be a vampire, because you get 10% additional stamina and magicka regen that way, as long as you're stage 2. Do take a little bit more fire damage though, so it's kind of up to you if you want to be a vampire for the additional regen. Our Mundus, we are going with the Shadow here. That did get a nice buff in Wrathstone, so it went from 9% base to 13% base, or almost a 50% buff. So the Shadow is definitely going to be the Mundus of choice here. Now for food, I am using Lavafoot Soup and Saltress. This is the Parse food, so this basically imitates orbs with a little bit less max stamina compared to blue food. This just allows me to basically say, okay, I'm getting orbs and I'm also using blue food. In an actual raid environment, you would not typically be using Lavafoot. Instead, you'd be using something like Dubious Camoran Throne or Armaments Takeaway Broth instead for additional health. On an orc, if you are going to be using a Dubious Camoran Throne or Armaments Takeaway Broth, you will end up getting a decent amount of health overall. I'm just going to see. Don't have Dubious Camoran Throne, but Clockwork Citrus Fillet does give you the same amount of max health. You'll see that you will be sitting at about 16,000 max health if you are using Armaments Takeaway Broth or Dubious Camoran Throne. But again, for the purposes of the parse, we are going to be using Lavafoot because this does imitate getting orbs with blue food. Moving on to our skills. Starting off with our front bar here, we have Carve. This is going to be our dot as well as our minor heroism, so this just gives us a little bit faster ulti generation. Executioner, this is going to be our primary spam buff. Dark Deal for the additional sustain. Rearming Trap for the minor force. We have Bound Armaments for the additional max stamina, and then we have Flawless Dawnbreaker for the additional weapon damage. Then on our back bar, we have Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, all three very strong dots. We have Hurricane, very nice dot, as well as giving us Major Ward and Major Resolve for additional survivability. Then we also have Bound Armaments again for the additional max stamina bonus, and then we have Greater Storm Atronach here. This is going to be the ultimate of choice here. Definitely going to want to use this over the Bow ultimate. It has very, very good single target DPS, but it also provides Major Berserk for anybody who activates the synergies. It just increases the damage done by 25%. A very nice buff overall, so make sure you are running Greater Storm Atronach there for some additional group DPS as well. Now, you will notice that I am using Executioner rather than any of the morphs of Uppercut, so Wrecking Blow would be the other move here. So we are going with Executioner because Uppercut does have a cast time associated with it, so we will be giving up 1 global cooldown. That also, Executioner is going to be, generally speaking, going to be a little bit stronger, mostly because we're able to basically use 2 in the space of 1 uppercut, but also one of the reasons why we're not using Wrecking Blow is because we don't really have the bar space for it. If we were to give up some bar space here, we'd basically have to move Dark Deal to the back bar here and give up Bound Armaments. Because we are using Advanced Yokeda, we do want to limit the time that we are on our back bar to only 3 global cooldowns. Dark Deal does have a cast time associated with it of 1.2 seconds, so this basically acts as 2 global cooldowns. So if we do need to use the Dark Deal on our back bar here, it's going to be very tricky with our rotation, because when we want to re-up it, we're basically going to have to go to our back bar, recast it, go to our front bar, make sure we keep our Advanced Yokeda stacks, and then go back to our back bar if we need to finish up our back bar rotation. That just basically ends up leaving us with a lot more downtime on our dots, and our dots here are going to be very important. Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail are all very strong dots, so we don't want to basically minimize the downtime we have on these dots. That's why we're not using Wrecking Blow, we're using Executioner instead as our primary spam here. Going over our champion points, the TP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so that gives us 810 points total at max CP, 270 points across each of our different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, 75 in the Moon Cap, 75 in Tenacity. That gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes however we'd like, so I have it split up 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord, but you can divide it up however you would like. You could also push Mooncalf and Tenacity up to 100 points if you would like, giving us 70 points remaining. That'll give you that last 1 percentage point there. For our blue CPs, I have 46 into Piercing, 56 into Mighty, 56 Precise Strikes, 56 Thaumaturge, and 56 in the Master at Arms. 56 across the board, except for Piercing, which we have 46 points in. to. Now this is just to make up for the loss of penetration because we are not running the Lover anymore. So between the Sharpened as trait on our front bar as well as the piercing, additional penetration we get from piercing, that does make up a little bit for the loss of penetration. We will be able to reach the penetration cap if we have all of our debuffs active. Finally, our red CPs. This is a one-size-fits-most approach, so this will give you a very balanced sort of mitigation. It will not necessarily give you the best mitigation across any single piece of content. In order to do that, you will need to kind of readjust your red CPs according to whatever trial that you happen to be running. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for the build stuff, so let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. We will be using the 3 million dummy here to kind of demonstrate the rotation, kind of talk it through. So the big thing is, if you are using Advanced Yokeda, the buff only lasts for 5 seconds. So if you think about this in global cooldowns, this basically gives us 3 to 4 global cooldowns before you need to go back to your front bar to make sure you are refreshing that buff. 3 global cooldowns on your back bar, generally speaking, is going to be very safe. 4 is pushing it a little bit because you do have to take into consideration the animation time to bar swap. So you always want to limit yourself to 3 global cooldowns on the back bar. So that's basically 3 abilities at all times. So going into the parse, you want to pre-buff if you can with Dark Deal. Just make sure you have that sort of regen actively going before you actually start the rotation here. Then I also like to start with Rearming Trap. And then you do your back bar rotation. So you will just do all of your back bar dots first. Now Hurricane has a 15-second duration versus 10 on Endless Hail, 10 on Poison Injection, and 12 on Caltrops. So you will need to basically break up your back bar rotation a little bit here, like so. We'll go over, continue on the rotation a little bit here because we do want to go over what happens when you have all your dots on your back bar are basically going to expire at around the same time. So again, a little bit dynamic because you do need to re-up Hurricane by kind of breaking your front bar rotation a little bit there. So here you'll see that our back bar dots are all going to end up expiring at around the same time. So in this instance here, you're basically going to do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Hurricane, go up to your front bar, cast Carve, then go back to your back bar and finish off with Poison Injection that way. And that's basically the gist of the rotation. So there is a little bit of dynamic parts behind it here just because we have 4 dots we want to maintain and they don't all have the exact same timers. So when we do a 6-minute dummy parse, I'll kind of talk you through it while I'm going through it. But again, the general idea is you want to make sure you have Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection going, swap to your front bar, then use your front bar rotation however you need to, and then go to your back bar, and whenever Hurricane is expired, use Hurricane once, go back to your front bar, finish your front bar rotation. I typically like to drop my Rearming Trap before I go to my back bar to do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection. You'll lose a little bit of DPS because you are going to be overcasting Rearming Trap a little bit here. That's just something that you're going to have to deal with. And then whenever you want to use your ultimate, I try to use it last, just because it does have a fairly long cast animation, so you can bar swap out of it that way. That being said, if you are also using Poison Injection, do the Atro, then the Poison Injection, because the Poison Injection, you do want to bar swap cancel that if you can. So that way it's inheriting your front bar stats rather than your back bar stats on your ticks. So now that we've gone over all of that stuff, let's go ahead and do our 6-minute dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the amount of DPS that you're able to pull here. Now do bear in mind that our amount of penetration that we're getting here compared to a dual wield build is going to be a little bit different. So just kind of keep that in mind when we want to compare this to a dual wield stem sword parse. We also don't get a native source of major fracture or minor fracture, so if you want to compare this to other two-handed builds or other stamina DPS builds, just bear that in mind that stem swords do not have a source of major fracture, while some other classes do have sources of major fractures. Just, again, keep that in mind. The penetration bonuses will matter when you're doing self-buff tests. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this test here. I am also using weapon power pots. You should be using them whenever you can. Not only do they provide good sustain, they're also your source of major brutality and major savagery. So when you go to your back bar, make sure you're doing a light attack and then bar swap, rather than, so you do light attack, bar swap right into Endless Hail. Make sure you're not doing a light attack when you do your bar swap to your back bar there. That just saves you an additional, some extra time to make sure you have good uptime on advancing Yokeda. You can see here, Hurricane is going to run out at about the same time as our other dots, so we do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Hurricane, go to our back bar here, drop Atro, Poison Injection, and then go back to our front bar rotation. Again, break our front bar rotation to recast Hurricane. One thing to take note of is you cannot use potions while you're in the middle of a Dark Deal cast, so just bear that in mind if you do want to use a potion. Alright, we're in execute phase now, so you should see our DPS start to really jump as a combination of Executioner and our Bloodthirsty traits. I'm not going to recast Dark Deal, I'm going to execute, and there we have it. So in Execute, you don't necessarily need to recast Dark Deal if you do not want to. It's kind of up to you, depending on how much stamina you have, how many orbs support you're getting, things like that. So you don't necessarily need to cast Dark Deal when you're in Execute. That saves you basically 2 global cooldown. That allows you to basically use 2 additional Executioners for some more DPS that way. So here is our, oh, that's not our parse. Here is our parse here, so 41.6k, and again, just bear in mind that our physical penetration is going to be a little bit different compared to a dual wield build and compared to some other classes as well. You can see here, Berserking Warrior, we have 94% uptime. That's pretty much as high as you're going to be able to get on a self-buffed parse, assuming that you're starting on your back bar here. And you can see here, Executioner does ramp up quite heavily, especially in Execute here, with a max crit of 55.5k. Very, very strong spam bull here. Now again, we aren't using Wrecking Blow because it does have a cast time associated with it, so this just allows us to use more Executioners. Wrecking Blow is a perfectly fine move, it's just the sacrifices that we have to make in order to use it don't really pan out very well. Executioner as a spam bull is going to be, generally speaking, a little bit more consistent DPS, it's going to be a little bit higher DPS as well. And the Atro, even though it does deal shock damage, so it doesn't get any sort of boost from our as nearly as much as a boost, I should say, from our CPs as on a magic DPS, it still does a very good amount of damage. Plus, we're using it mainly for the major berserk that it can give out to the. So again, don't sleep on the Atro. Don't necessarily use Ballista. I would recommend running the Atronach rather than the Ballista instead for that major berserk uptime. So that is pretty much it for this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about this build, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. I don't normally run a two-handed Sorc, but I do use it on occasion when I do decide to pull out my Stam Sorc. That's it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.